Hey everyone. Tonight, we're drifting back to the age of lace and silence, a world where the word pleasure was never spoken, yet lingered in every drawing room like the faint scent of candle wax and dust. London, 1852. A woman lies awake in her bed, the sheets stiff with starch. Outside, a carriage rattles past. Inside, her pulse counts the seconds. She doesn't know the word for what she feels, only that it frightens her. Her doctor says she's ill. Hysteria, he calls it, a sickness of women. He tells her her nerves are overexcited, that her body needs relief. And so tomorrow, she will visit his office, a narrow room that smells of alcohol and lavender water. She will sit perfectly still while he performs what he calls a pelvic massage. He will not meet her eyes. He will not think of it as desire. And when her body trembles, he will record it neatly at his notes as paroxysm achieved. He will feel professional. She will feel nothing she can name. That was the Victorian miracle. They found a way to turn a woman's longing into paperwork. Doctors wrote entire textbooks about the dangers of arousal. They warned that women who desired too much risked madness, sterility, even death. Men, of course, were simply vigorous, but a woman with color in her cheeks was a medical problem, and so the age of moral medicine began. Imagine the clinic, gaslight humming, brass clock ticking, white aprons and quiet shame. Women lined up like clockwork dolls' wives, daughters, governesses, convinced she was the only one. They came for headaches, melancholy, sleeplessness. The cure was always the same: control the body, calm the mind, preserve purity. No one called it what it was. They said therapy, they said restoration, but in those cold rooms, behind the sound of gloves and instruments, the truth quivered like a trapped heartbeat. Not every woman endured it in silence. Some laughed, some wept. One, according to a nurse's diary, whispered, "Thank you," before fainting. Another asked if she could come again, and was told, politely, that repeated treatment might prove addictive. Doctors began to complain of exhaustion. They invented machines to do the tiring work for them, steam-driven, whirring, obedient. The first mechanical vibrator was born, not from passion, but from professional fatigue. A brass cylinder, a hose, a faint hiss of pressure. Progress, they called it. It's easy to smile at the absurdity now. The men who feared pleasure built an entire industry to deliver it. But for the women, it wasn't comedy. It was the only language their bodies were allowed to speak. They were told they were fragile, so they learned to tremble. They were told they were pure, so they learned to hide. And when their own skin betrayed them, they called it healing. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear them, the soft rhythm of breath, the creak of the couch, the faint electric hum that would one day replace the doctor's hand. Each sound, a note in the strange symphony of Victorian medicine. It wasn't madness. It was loneliness, wrapped in linen and Latin. So let's stay here for a moment in the dim light between heartbeat and shame, because this is where the story begins. Not with sin or science, but with a woman who could not sleep and a world that refused to let her dream. If you're still awake, we'll drift a little further, soon to see how an empire built on progress managed to call desire a disease. If we drift forward a few years, the lamps are brighter, but the silence is the same. The empire has learned to package its fears in cleaner words. Doctors still whisper about purity, priests still preach about control, and in every town someone is inventing a new rule for how women should behave. They call it moral hygiene. It sounds like virtue, but it smells faintly of disinfectant and fear. What began as a private illness has become public business. The same men who once warned that passion would ruin the nerves now insist that impurity will ruin the nation. In the port cities and garrison towns, soldiers march, and the women who sell flowers or linger too long near the barracks are no longer seen as people. They are suspected. Under the Contagious Diseases Acts, the police can stop them, examine them, lock them away. A medical inspection, they call it, necessary for the health of men who might serve the Queen. The law says it protects morality. The women say nothing at all, because who would listen to a voice that society has already declared impure? The examination rooms are small, white and cold. A table, a lamp, a pair of gloved hands. A woman is told to undress. If she resists, she is forced. If she cries, she is restrained. Her body becomes a battlefield, not of sin and virtue now, but of law and order. They record her name in ink. They call her common. Then they move on to the next. To the officials, it is procedure. To her, it is something she will never quite forget. But not everyone stays silent. In 1869, a woman named Josephine Butler, respectable, widowed, furious, steps into a hall full of men and begins to speak. She has seen too many ruined lives, too many women punished for the desires of others. Her voice trembles but does not break. She calls the law what it is, a cruelty wrapped in science. She travels the country, organizing other women, speaking of injustice in churches and schools, and every time she says the word prostitute aloud, the audience gasps as if the syllables themselves could stain their clothes. They tell her she is indecent. She keeps speaking anyway. Her campaign lasts nearly 20 years. The newspapers mock her. Politicians ignore her, but slowly, the tide shifts. People begin to understand that purity cannot be policed. In 1886, the acts are finally repealed. The empire congratulates itself for being enlightened, as if the wound has not already scarred over. Josephine grows old, her voice softer, but her anger never really fades. She has spent a lifetime watching the word health used as a weapon. Still, the fear does not die. It only changes costume. The talk of purity drifts into talk of bloodlines. The doctors begin to measure skulls and record family trees. They call it heredity. They say they can breed morality the way farmers breed better horses. Francis Galton draws diagrams and writes essays on eugenics, a word he invents to make cruelty sound intelligent. Society listens. It always does when fear is spoken in Latin. Now even babies are judged before they're born. Poverty becomes a symptom. Illness becomes a stain. A woman's worth is measured not in virtue, but in how well her children might serve the nation. They're still policing bodies, just with thermometers instead of batons. The language of sin has become the language of science. And yet, beneath all the measurements and moral lectures, the same quiet story continues. A girl in a small town still wonders why her thoughts make her blush. A wife still lies awake beside a husband who never looks her in the eyes. A mother still warns her daughter not to sit a certain way, not to laugh too loudly, not to walk alone. The empire may have changed its laws, but it never stopped teaching women to fear themselves. When Josephine Butler dies, her name appears briefly in the papers. The obituaries call her a woman of strong conviction. Then they move on to the next headline. History remembers her politely. But somewhere, in the hush between one century and the next, another woman will rise from that same silence, ready to ask again why comfort and control always seem to mean the same thing. If you're still with me, we'll drift a little further to the turn of a new century, where the lamps hum louder, the corsets loosen, and the fear begins to speak in the language of dreams. If we drift a little further, the air grows softer, and the light changes. The year is 1901. The Queen is gone, the Empire still standing, but something in the air has loosened just slightly, like a corset unlaced after too many hours. The new century promises invention, comfort, and light. Electric bulbs glow where candles once flickered. Trains move faster, telegrams travel farther, and people begin to imagine that they understand themselves. But the old fears haven't left. They've only learned to whisper in a different accent. In drawing rooms and clinics, a new word is spreading: psychology. It sounds modern, clean, respectable. The body is no longer a vessel of sign, it is now a map of nerves, impulses, and memories. Doctors who once prescribed ice baths now prescribe conversation. They listen to patients speak about dreams, about childhood, about longing. At the center of it all sits a man with a beard and calm, watchful eyes, Sigmund Freud. He tells the world that repression is not virtue, but illness. He says the human mind is full of secrets, that every respectable man and woman carries within them a small, forbidden fire. For some, his words are liberation. For others, they are horror. The idea that desire is natural, that the mind itself feeds on what society forbids, feels too close to blasphemy. Yet the age is tired of silence. The same women who once fainted at the mention of the word sex now attend lectures about the unconscious. They read Freud's essays by lamplight, their cheeks warm with a mix of embarrassment and curiosity. Some begin to write about their own experiences. They talk of marriage, of medicine, of loneliness disguised as propriety. But outside those quiet studies, the world is changing in louder ways. The new king, Edward VII, is not a man of restraint. He dines late, laughs freely, and carries his scandals like medals. Under his reign, pleasure becomes fashionable again so long as it's dressed in velvet and champagne. The newspapers call it the Edwardian Golden Age. They don't mention how many people are still learning to breathe after a century of suffocation. In London, young women cut their hair short, loosen their corsets, and walk unchaperoned through streets that once would have condemned them. They work, they read, they think. But freedom, like everything else, comes with rules. Be modern, but not immodest. Be charming, but not forward. Be independent, but never alone. Each new liberty arrives wrapped in invisible tape. The world is loosening, but only by degrees. Meanwhile, doctors and psychologists argue about what counts as healthy desire. Havelock Ellis writes a book suggesting that pleasure-eyes, even solitary pleasure, isn't sinful or shameful, just human. The book is banned, of course. That's how people know it's worth reading. Others, following Freud, begin to see repression as the true disease. The human mind, they say, cannot bear to be constantly cleaned. Too much purity, like too much medicine, makes the patient worse. But even as these ideas drift through universities and cafes, the old voices linger. The priests still speak of virtue. The newspapers still warn of moral decay. Every generation fears the one that dares to feel. If you were a woman then, the contradictions would feel dizzying. The magazines tell you to be graceful, educated, alluring, but never too alluring. The doctor says your body is healthy, but your nerves are delicate. The preacher insists you are equal before God, but somehow always after men. In private, you might read Freud and wonder if the world has gone mad, or if it has simply begun to describe the madness out loud. In Vienna, a patient lies on a couch, speaking softly. Her voice trembles as she describes dreams she cannot explain. Freud listens. He calls her Anna O, though that is not her real name. He says her illness is not in her body, but in her memory. The diagnosis is new, but the story is old. A woman, her silence, and a man translating her pain into theory. Yet something is different now. For the first time, her voice, her words become the medicine. The century rolls forward, restless. Machines hum in the streets, and inside them, people hum too, half in fear, half in anticipation. The old empires begin to crack. A new kind of chaos gathers behind polite conversation. And when the first shots of war are fired in 1914, it feels almost inevitable it could be a fever breaking. The same doctors who once lectured about masturbation and morality now treat soldiers who cannot stop shaking. They call it shell shock. The symptoms look familiar: trembling, insomnia, tears for no reason. Once, these would have been labeled feminine, hysterical. Now they belong to men. The world begins to realize that fragility is not a gendered disease, it is a human one. When the war ends, the silence feels different. The corsets are gone, the parlors faded, the patients older. People have seen too much to keep pretending. The human body is not sinful or sacred anymore, it's just breakable. And yet, even in this exhausted age, the old fears will not die. They will simply learn to sell themselves in new ways. If you're still awake, we'll drift there next to the decade that danced in defiance of everything that came before. The years when pleasure became fashion and forgetting became an art. If we drift onward, the world brightens suddenly, as if someone pulled the heavy drapes open after a long, grey century. The year is 1925 and everything hums. Radios sing, gramophones spin, cars glint in the sunlight like coins. The Great War is over, and people are tired of grief. They want noise, glitter, movement, anything that proves they are still alive. They call it the Jazz Age, but it could just as easily be called the Age of Distraction. Women cut their hair short and their dresses shorter. They dance until dawn, smoke in public, drink with strangers, and laugh too loudly. Each gesture is a small rebellion, a way of saying, we survived. The body, once hidden behind layers of fabric and shame, becomes decoration again. Powder, lipstick, perfume made tiny. Weapons against despair. Men call them frivolous. Women know better. It isn't vanity, it's armor. The same doctors who once prescribed cold baths now prescribe leisure. Rest cures become spa holidays, and the language of medicine slides seamlessly into the language of luxury. What used to be called nervous exhaustion is now called stress. What used to be sin is now fashion. The lines blur until no one can tell the difference. The modern woman is healthy, radiant, perfectly composed, and secretly still exhausted. In silent movie theaters, faces flicker larger than life. The new heroines Garbo, Beau, Brooks move like smoke. Their eyes are knowing, their smiles dangerous. They are everything Victorian women were told not to be, and audiences adore them for it. Watching them is a kind of permission. For 90 minutes, a girl from Leeds or Liverpool can forget who she's supposed to be and imagine another self. Clever, daring, free. But the film ends. The lights come up, and she smooths her skirt before stepping back into a world that still expects her to be polite. Advertising discovers desire next. Magazines show shining skin, perfect teeth, electric gadgets that promise vitality and confidence. Even pleasure is repackaged as self-improvement. A vibrator is now a beauty aid. A face cream promises youthful circulation. Every product whispers the same message. You are almost enough. Just one more purchase, one more ritual, one more cure. The Victorians preached salvation through control. The moderns preach salvation through consumption. Different sermons, same hunger. In small apartments, women hang their dresses to dry and read articles about the perfect figure. In offices, typists practice good posture as if it were moral behavior. In factories, the rhythm of machines replaces the rhythm of thought. Everywhere, the new century hums with purpose, but beneath it all runs the same quiet pulse of worry. Am I doing this right? Am I enough? Then the music falters. 1929, markets crash, dreams collapse in neat numerical order. The lights dim again, though this time it isn't moral panic, but poverty that closes the curtains. Families queue for bread, factories close, and the bright city becomes a gray maze of survival. Once again, women bear the invisible weight keeping households together, stitching old clothes, pretending not to be afraid. Moralists resurface like mold, blaming indulgence, warning of decadence, insisting that hard times demand hard virtue. The words sound familiar. The ghosts never really left. Still, the body adapts. It always does. Women learn new versions of strength. They cut coupons instead of ribbons. They make powder from cornstarch, lipstick from beet juice, glamour out of nothing. Magazines call it thrift. Historians will call it resilience. They won't mention the quiet exhaustion behind it. By the mid-1930s, the tension is back in the air. Doctors talk again about nerves, but this time they blame modern life too much noise, too much speed, too much desire. They invent new tonics, new tablets, new wellness regimes. The names change, the message doesn't. Control the body, calm the mind, stay pure now not for God or Queen, but for your own good. And somewhere, between the hum of machines and the rhythm of jazz, a new kind of fear begins to form. If the last century feared pleasure, this one fears imperfection. The corsets may be gone, but the mirror has taken their place. Women still look for peace, and the world still sells it to them in jars. If you're still listening, we'll drift a little further to the decades when science began to speak the language of morality again, when psychology replaced sermons, and the search for purity found new disguises. If we drift a little further, the music fades and the hum of engines grows louder. The year is 1946. The war is over again, though peace feels fragile, like porcelain that might crack if anyone speaks too loudly. The cities are bruised, the men are thin, and the women, those who filled the factories and drove the ambulances, are being told it's time to go home. The world thanks them politely and asks them to shrink back into shape. They're expected to put the uniforms away, fix their hair, and start smiling again. After all, civilization must rebuild itself, and what better bricks than obedient wives and healthy mothers? Psychology has replaced religion now, but it preaches much the same sermon. The new prophets wear lab coats. They talk about adjustment, stability, normality. The perfect citizen is the perfect family. A husband who works, a wife who nurtures, children who don't ask questions. Magazines call it domestic harmony. Psychiatrists call it mental hygiene. Housewives call it something else when they're alone. Emptiness. In the suburbs of America and the quiet streets of post-war Europe, millions of women begin to feel an ache that medicine cannot name. They are told it's just the nerves again. Too much time at home, too little gratitude. There are pills for that now, little white ones that smooth the edges. The chemists smile. Business is good. Women learn to breathe around the ache, to fold it neatly between grocery lists and laundry. It's what their mothers did, and their mothers before them. Then a small crack appears in the mirror. A scientist named Alfred Kinsey begins to publish studies on human sexuality. His research is clinical, full of graphs and numbers, but his findings are quietly explosive. The reports say what everyone already knew and no one dared admit. Nearly everyone touches themselves. Nearly everyone pretends they don't. The scandal is enormous. Politicians call him immoral. Churches call him dangerous. But the truth, once spoken, doesn't vanish. It lingers in the air like perfume, shocking, undeniable, oddly liberating. The 1950s arrive wrapped in bright paper. Television glows in every living room, selling an image of perfect happiness. Gleaming kitchens, fresh haircuts, smiling wives holding casseroles. But the old ghosts are still in the walls. Doctors still warn that too much passion ruins the nerves. Priests still caution against temptation. The vocabulary has changed. Hysteria becomes frustration. Sin becomes instability, but the diagnosis is the same. The cure is still obedience. By the 1960s, the world is tired of pretending again. The children of those perfect families grow up restless. They burn their draft cards and their bras. They sing in the streets. They take pills that promise vision and love instead of numbness. And once more, women begin to talk about bodies, about choice, about how tired they are of being told what health means. A small, buzzing object returns from the shadows of medical history, but this time it's not hidden in clinics or catalogues. It's sold openly, marketed for pleasure, not therapy. What began as a doctor's invention becomes a symbol of freedom. Still, freedom is never simple. Every liberation comes with a new set of expectations. The magazines that once told women to keep quiet now tell them to be wild, but beautifully so. The world is changing, yet the pressure remains, reshaped into slogans and trends. The body, once forbidden, is now demanded. The corset has returned, only this time it's invisible, woven from perfection itself. Somewhere in the late 20th century, a new gospel begins to spread, the gospel of wellness. The language of purity returns wearing gym clothes and green juice. The promise is the same as ever: control yourself, and you'll be happy. Control your body, and your mind will follow. The words sound scientific, but the echo is old, unmistakable, Victorian. The tools have changed, no more clamps or tonics, just scales and mirrors and endless comparisons. But the prayer is identical. Make me better. Make me clean. If you're still with me, we'll drift gently forward once more to the world that looks like ours, where shame has been rebranded as self-improvement, and the search for the perfect body has become the quietest, most respectable madness of all. If we drift closer to the world we know, the noise changes again. The old hymns about purity have been remixed into mantras about wellness, balance, and glow. It is the 1980s now, and the body has become a project, something to sculpt, measure, and optimize. Gyms replace chapels, diet books replace prayer books. Aerobics instructors shout encouragement that sounds suspiciously like confession. Push harder, burn faster, be better. It's not salvation they promise anymore. It's transformation. Magazines show glossy smiles and taut skin. They call it empowerment. They call it self-care. But behind every slogan about confidence is the same quiet demand for control. The modern woman, like her Victorian ancestor, still spends her days managing herself. Only now it's calories instead of chastity, mindfulness instead of modesty. The corset has changed shape, but it's still there, tightening from the inside this time. The word pleasure has been polished into something marketable. There are scented candles, weekend retreats, skin serums that promise to reignite your inner spark. Desire is no longer a sin. It's a sales category. Doctors talk about hormones and serotonin where priests once spoke of temptation, and somehow the advice is the same. Discipline leads to happiness. Too much indulgence, whether in food, sleep, or love, is still a warning sign. In the background, technology hums quietly. Screens flicker to life, bringing with them a new mirror that reflects more than glass ever could. On television, the perfect bodies move like prayers in motion. On early computers, new images begin to circulate, intimate, endless, anonymous. The body is finally everywhere, yet rarely at peace. By the 1990s, everyone seems to be talking about freedom. The walls are coming down, both political and personal. But freedom carries its own kind of exhaustion. The more choices people are offered, the more they feel they must choose correctly. Every generation believes it has escaped the fears of the last. Every generation discovers new ways to keep them. A woman in her 30s jogs before sunrise. She eats clean, works hard, meditates before bed. She has learned to call her rituals healthy, not holy, but the devotion feels the same. She is not trying to be pure. She is trying to be enough. And somewhere in her, that familiar whisper returns, the one that began centuries ago in gaslit bedrooms and marble clinics. You must be good to be safe. You must be perfect to be loved. The 21st century arrives glowing with optimism and screens. Wellness becomes an industry worth billions. Meditation apps, DNA diets, wearable trackers, all promising mastery of the body, harmony of the mind. The technology changes, but the impulse remains exactly the same. Measure, correct, improve. Desire, once forbidden, is now prescribed. There are pills to lift it, pills to dull it, diets to reshape it, algorithms to sell it back to us in curated form. We are no longer told that self-control will save our souls. We are told it will save our data, our jobs, our skin, our youth. And perhaps that is the strangest transformation of all. The fear of the body has not vanished. It has simply become invisible, woven into the rhythm of ordinary life. We count steps, we count calories, we count hours of sleep, as if salvation might be waiting at the bottom of a spreadsheet. Some nights, when the house is quiet, a woman might still wake and lie in the dark, her phone glowing beside her like a tiny oracle. She scrolls past smiling strangers, miracle products, words that promise balance. She feels the same ache as her Victorian sisters did, though she wouldn't call it that. It's just restlessness, she tells herself. Just nerves. And perhaps it is. The world has changed, and it hasn't. The white coats have replaced the black robes, the gym, the confessional, the influencer, the doctor. But the sentence is the same. Fix yourself, and you'll be free. The body has become the one empire that never fell, still ruled, still resisted, still restless. If you're still awake, we'll drift one last time toward the quiet ending of this long story, where the centuries blur together, and the only thing left to cure is the need to be cured at all. If we drift one last time, the centuries begin to blur. The candles, the gas lamps, the bulbs, the screens, they all glow the same way in memory. The rooms change, the clothes change, the language changes, but the body remains. It waits, patient as stone, through every new rule and cure and promise. The same pulse that once trembled under a doctor's glove now beats under a smart watch. The same breath that once shuddered in a clinic now steadies itself in a yoga class. The search for control has never really stopped. It has only grown quieter, more polite. And yet something has changed. Slowly, softly, the silence is breaking. Women speak now in public, in print, in whispers that circle the globe. They tell their own stories instead of being written into someone else's case file. They say the words that once would have ruined them: pleasure, pain, desire, rage. They name the illnesses that never had names and the cures that never cured anything. They laugh in the open, sometimes bitterly, sometimes with relief. It isn't perfect, but it is finally theirs. The old ghosts still visit. They hide in mirrors, in magazines, in voices that say you should be thinner, calmer, better. But they don't stay as long anymore. We've learned to recognize them by their tone, the same soft authority that once promised salvation. Now we know that peace doesn't sound like that. Peace is quieter still. If you listen closely, you can hear all the women who came before breathing beside you. The one in the clinic, the one on the stage, the one holding her child while the factory whistles outside. They're all part of the same long inhale, the same wish for rest. The world told them to be clean, to be good, to be small. And still, somehow, they kept breathing. They kept surviving. It's strange to think that after everything, the sermons, the medicine, the endless cures, the simplest truth was always this: the body was never the enemy. It was only trying to speak. Every tremor, every hunger, every sigh was a language that no one wanted to translate. But it waited anyway, patient as earth, until someone was finally quiet enough to listen. So now, in this last moment, let it rest. The body, the mind, the story. Let it all be what it always was: imperfect, alive, human. The lights dim, the room softens. Somewhere in the distance, a heartbeat keeps time with the world. It doesn't need to be cured. It only needs to be heard. And if your eyes are still open, you can close them now. The story has nowhere else to go. The age of madness is over. What's left is just the breathing slow, steady, and free.